how to change direct to indirect speech for yes no questions. Before we start, let's talk about if and whether noun clauses. So, what is a clause? Clauses are like mini sentences, and clauses have a subject and a predicate, that is, verb plus an object. And clauses are inside sentences, such as subject. And clauses are inside sentences, but they're not sentences. They occur inside sentences. Anyways, let's look at an example. Dogs eat meat and bones. Here, dogs eat meat and bones is not a sentence, it's a clause. We don't have a capital D, we don't have a period. Here the subject is dogs, the verb is eat, and the object is meat and bones. Let's look now at if whether noun clauses. If whether noun clauses function like nouns in a sentence. For example, people ask something. Here the noun is something. I can replace something with a if whether noun clause. People ask if earth is round. Okay, here you can see how I replace something with if earth is round, and you can see how if whether noun clauses function like nouns. If whether noun clauses have a main clause, people ask is the main clause here, and if whether noun clauses usually begin with either if or whether. Okay, moving forward now, let's look a little bit more deeply into if whether noun clauses. So if whether noun clauses are the objects of a main verb in a main clause. Here the ask is the main verb in the main clause. Keep in mind that main verbs tend to be reporting verbs for when you're reporting a question in direct speech and indirect speech. The reporting verbs tend to be say, state, tell, think, agree, suggest, ask, argue, and question and request. If whether noun clauses also have a subject and a verb, remember they are, after all, clauses. Here the subject is earth, the verb is, and of course it's an if whether noun clause, so it starts with if or whether. Let's look a little bit more. Remember that noun clauses with if and whether are similar to yes no questions in that they offer two options. So for example, I don't know what you are thinking. I don't know if whether you're thinking good things or bad things. So it's two options, good or bad things. Okay. Here, I don't know what you are thinking. It's similar to a WH information question. What are you thinking? And here, if whether is similar to a yes no question. Are you thinking good things? So you can see how I don't know what you are thinking functions like an information question. It could be indirect information question. And yes no question, if whether are you thinking good things or bad things, you can see how it functions as a yes no question because it offers two options. And remember, they are still clauses, so you have to have subject, verb, word, order. When we stated that you need to have subject, verb, word, order, so look at these two sentences. What's wrong in these two sentences? Okay, take about 5 seconds. I'll read it to you. 1, I'm not sure if will that student come to class. She can't decide whether should she go. Okay, read both sentences and try to find what's wrong in both sentences. Take about 5 seconds. Okay, good. If you said that the modal is in the wrong place, you're right. Okay, in both sentences, the modals are in the wrong place. Will that student come to class? That's a question, but not a clause. Okay, so I have to move will after this subject. I am not sure if that student will come to class. See, is moved after the subject. Same thing here. She can't decide whether should she go. Here should, the modal, is in the wrong place. Should come after the subject because should she go is a question. She should go is a clause. She can't decide whether she should go. Okay, so let's look at direct speech for yes no questions. As we know, direct speech is when we write down the exact word for word quote of something somebody said. And this usually occurs in narrative stories and in newspaper articles. For example, yesterday this boy asked, do we have homework? Today I wrote an article about it. Boy in school, he asked, do we have homework? Okay, end quote. Let's look at the form of direct speech WH questions. So, for example, reporting verb, say, ask, think, agree. Okay, the direct speech usually has a reporting verb. Here, the reporting verb is asked. Reporting verbs are say, ask, think, agree. Direct speech usually has quotations. You can see them here and here. The punctuation usually occurs inside the quotation marks, and the capital, a capital is inside the quotation mark. So you start the quote with a capital. And of course, you begin before the quotation marks, and after reporting verb, you have a comma. Let's look at indirect speech for yes/no questions. Okay, indirect speech once again is when someone writes down what someone else said, but usually not word for word, or says what someone else said, but not word for word. And this is usually used in academic essays, scholarly articles, and when speaking. So, example, do we have homework? This boy yesterday said, do we have homework? Yesterday, and today you asked me. Okay, what did he ask? So I would tell you, he asked if they had homework. Okay, so yesterday he asked, do we have homework? Today I tell you, he asked if they had homework. So let's look at the form of indirect speech. Indirect speech usually has a reporting verb. Say, ask, think, agree. Here it's asked. Indirect speech usually has a backshifted auxiliary, or backshifted modal, or a backshifted be verb. Here we don't say have, but we say had, if they had homework. And lastly, the reported speech usually occurs inside the if whether noun clause. So if they had homework. So let's look at how to change a direct speech to indirect speech for yes/no questions. So to change direct speech into indirect speech, first we must remove the comma to no comma. Remove the quotation marks, no quotation marks. Add if whether after the reporting verb. Here we're going to choose whether. Move the be verb after the subject and backshift the be verb. So here we have is, but we don't want to say is, we want to say was, and we want this was to come after the money, the subject. And lastly, we remove the question mark. And what do we get? He asked whether money was important. Let's look at another example. Okay, here he asked, can I swim here? So we remove the comma. Okay, we remove the quotation marks. Okay, add if or whether after the reporting verb. Here we're going to use if. Okay, he asked if, and we use a modal can after the subject, and we backshift the modal. So instead of can I, we say I could, and change the pronoun. Here I is he, so we got to change I to he. So we say, and of course we remove the question mark. So we get, he asked if he could swim here. So let's do a quick summary. Direct speech is when we write down the exact thing someone said before. This is usually used when telling a narrative story or newspaper articles. He asked, do we have homework? Indirect speech is used when we write down what someone said but not directly word for word. And it's usually used in academic essays, scholarly articles, and when speaking. So he asked if they had homework. To change direct speech to indirect speech, we must remove the comma, no comma. Add if whether. Change the subject to a pronoun if necessary, not I, but he. Remove the quotation marks. 5, backshift the auxiliary or the modal, and then move the auxiliary or modal after the subject. So not can he, but can he could. And lastly, we remove the question mark. Well, that ends my presentation. If you have any thoughts, questions, or concerns, please email me, and thank you so much for watching.